While most news outlets are focused on the Kremlin's involvement in the presidential election of the United States, the Russian public is preparing to choose its own head of state. The country's largest poll predicts that Putin will win about 70% of the vote, but Russian policymakers are already thinking beyond election day. As we explained in the previous report, Putin has promised to implement economic reforms in his next term. However, what is less explored are the upcoming security changes that will shape the balance of power within Russia's security apparatus. My name is Shirvan and welcome to Caspian Report. As Putin enters his 18th year in power, he has quietly become the longest-serving leader in Russia since Stalin. For most of the years in power, the majority of the Russian public recognized Putin as the man who saved the country from the political and economic disasters of the 1990s. That image held him in office for most of the time as either president or prime minister. However, Russia's demographics are changing. About a third of its workforce was born after the collapse of the Soviet Union. For this generation of Russians, the catastrophes of the 1990s is a distant memory, and they also do not recall a time before Putin. That being said, due to social media, the new generation is also more connected across the country as well as with the outside world. As such, they are more politically active than their predecessors. Now, this does not imply that the new generation opposes Putin and his government. Rather, it means that they want more options to shape the prospects of their country. The changing demographics have channeled into the growing opposition groups. According to independent sources, the country experienced more than 1,000 demonstrations in 2017. And what's more is that 2/3 of the protests were in objection to corruption and the increasingly dire financial conditions. In this understanding, modern Russia is surprisingly similar to the Brezhnev era. Even though it wasn't obvious on the surface, the Soviet economy was failing and the country was engaged in military conflicts while tensions were high with the United States. And at the same time, the Soviet youth had started to discover the Western way of life, and discontent among the people was steadily growing. And much like the Soviet authorities at the time, Putin's government has increasingly relied on the intelligence apparatus and security services to maintain power and overall stability. Considering this, Putin's hold on power is unlikely to waver in the coming years. However, as the president dedicates resources to bolster security, Russia's intelligence agencies have come to a head over the resources. Now, most people are familiar with the Federal Security Service, or FSB for short, which employs about 270,000 direct and indirect personnel across the country. The Bureau's scope of activities covers all areas of life in Russia, from the military to the banking sector. However, in recent years, a new major contender has entered the realm of intelligence. The 340,000-strong National Guard, also known as the Rosgvardia, is an independent federal executive body that was created by Putin in 2016 and reports directly to him. The agency is the result of last year's upheaval when the Kremlin purged more than a dozen regional governors for failing to pay federal taxes. Since then, Putin has questioned the competence and loyalty of Russia's provisional administrations, and in response, he created the National Guard. Over the course of 2017, the president raised the profile of his agency by adding additional assets, capabilities, and responsibilities to the bureau. Russian analysts expect that in his next term, Putin will transfer the remaining elite special forces from the internal affairs to his Rosgvardia. By doing so, the president will gain direct control over a single body to respond to unrest across the country. However, the FSB is troubled with the Rosgvardia's growing profile and its growing ties with other domestic security organizations such as the Federal Protective Service, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and the main intelligence directorate. To that end, the FSB leadership believes that the new Rosgvardia seeks to replace it as the country's leading state body. According to independent news outlets, the president and the FSB leadership are at odds over a number of issues, including the latter's failure to prevent the metro bombing in St. Petersburg in 2017, and more disputes include the rivalry between FSB director Alexander Bortnikov and Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov, as well as the FSB's attempt to limit the authority of the Rosgvardia. In the previous year, Putin's personal agency made substantial power grabs. It set up its own unit for cybersecurity and assumed the protection duties for regional leaders. Both of these areas used to be the sole responsibility of the FSB. Moreover, the Rosgvardia has taken over control of several elite special forces, and it now represents Russia in foreign security ties in addition to the FSB. The rapid surge of the Rosgvardia displays that the president has more faith in his own agency than the FSB, and it is speculated that in his next term, Putin will seek to reshuffle the authorities of the security services in favor of the Rosgvardia. The anticipated reforms could envision the restoration of the Ministry for State Security, which was a notorious centralized Soviet intelligence agency that operated during the reign of Joseph Stalin. If the Office of State Security is revived, it would replace the Ministry of Internal Affairs, whose responsibilities were essentially stripped in 2017. The restoration of the Ministry for State Security would bolster the authority of whoever leads it, as it would unify several security services into one conglomerate that is tasked with law enforcement, surveillance, espionage, and protection. For the Rosgvardia and the FSB, the possible revival of the Ministry for State Security is one more area for competition. Another dispute between the two agencies concerns the control over the Office of the Prosecutor General and its Investigative Committee. These are some of Russia's most influential anti-corruption institutions, as they have the power to investigate and prosecute the country's established elite. On paper, the Prosecutor General and the Investigative Committee are impartial bodies. In truth, the fealty of these offices have shifted back and forth between Russia's security agencies since their inception. However, some officials claim that Putin will seek to reconfigure the Investigative Committee in his next term. The Kremlin could either split the state body in several entities, but a more plausible outcome is that a new independent institution called the Federal Investigative Service is formed and tasked to take up some of the responsibilities of the Prosecutor General's Investigative Committee. Regardless of the reforms, the FSB and the Rosgvardia are likely to continue to compete for power. The reason why this rivalry matters is because Russia's political climate is changing. The public is increasingly calling for accountability, and so to retain legitimacy, Putin will have to endorse some sort of anti-corruption campaign, even if it is for PR purposes. That means that whoever controls the investigative and prosecutorial powers will yield the ability to shape how that anti-corruption campaign unfolds, and which members of the establishment hold or lose their assets. So, considering the stakes, Putin's next term will likely see the rivalry between the FSB and Rosgvardia intensify. This was a Caspian Report by me, Shirvan. Special thanks to our contributors on Patreon who give us the resources to continue our research and remain independent of sponsors. If you would like to join our network, or if you're looking for more information and perks, visit patreon.com/Caspian Report. In any case, thank you for your time and Sarol.